Hey everyone, welcome back to the Layback podcast. Joining us today is left-handed pitcher at Indiana University, Tony Neubeck. Tony and I got connected originally, I think it might have been July, when he was a part of the new transfer class for the Hoosiers. He happens to room with Layback alum, Flex Pro famed athlete Jackson Bergman. The two old heads got brought in to bolster the rotation or really just the staff in general at Indiana, and both of them happened to win spots. It kind of speaks to other Layback alum, his knowledge in Denton Sagerman in helping these guys make some significant tweaks to their arsenals. And I'm excited to talk about some of that stuff with Tony today. But Tony joins us today as he got left home from a midweek road trip so he can rest up before a big weekend. But Tony's already made a couple appearances so far as the Friday night guy for the Hoosiers against a couple of top five in the nation opponents in UNC as well as LSU. So I'm excited to talk about that as well as just hear his really amazing story when it comes to overcoming the UCL and elbow injuries he's experienced, because it certainly hasn't been the easiest college career or probably what anyone expected him to have on paper. But with that, I'm going to shut up and pass it over to Tony to cover some of the bio. Tony, thanks a ton for joining us today and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it's great to be on here. When you asked me if I wanted to join, I said if you think it would be interesting enough, love to. So yeah, I'm kind of made my way to Indiana University through my own little route. I spent first 4 years of college at Mizzou, and before that, spent my time in Minnesota doing my best to play baseball when the weather was nice. I came up from a family that was all about sports. Our weekends were wherever the tournaments were. Our vacations were the sunny places where the tournaments happen, Georgia, Iowa, stuff like that.
Calling Iowa sunny and warm is a stretch, but I guess that's Minnesota for you.
In the summer, it's nice. They got some nice fields there. Um, yeah, and it's been quite the journey to make it to Indiana University, and what a year it's been. Learn from people like Den Sagerman and be around people like Jackson Bergman and kind of bring out new stuff that makes me a better player.
Well, maybe the first question, you probably didn't expect this one, so I apologize for putting you on the spot right away. What was it like having to transition pitching coaches in the middle of the year?
Yeah, Coach Meyer coming in has been big. Of course, the relationship with Coach Glant and with Coach Sagerman, they kind of were the big part of bringing me in and talking to me when I was in the portal. And they kind of laid out the plan of what we were going to do in the fall, some of the aspects, some of the pitch design stuff, adding in some new factors like a cutter, adding a little tweaks here and there to see where that brings me come this spring. Of course, we love seeing Coach Glant take advantage of his opportunities. He's dreamed of being in the position that he took. We were happy to see him get that, but it was a little bit sad him leaving us, but he left us in the very capable hands of Coach Sagerman, and they brought in Coach Meyer. They just increased those capable hands, and it was a very clean transition. Coach Meyer kind of came in, observed for a little bit, and then has progressively, as those relationships have built, as that trust has been built, kind of added a few new things. And I think he's really a big part of how we are on the mound, and he adds a factor that I think is huge when it comes to kind of experience and stuff like that.
Yeah, obviously Coach Meyer has experience literally at every level. He's coached professionally. He spent time in the SEC. He's coached at the highest levels of the game and has worked with pitchers from all over. I know Sagerman does a tremendous job on the analytical side, the development side, and really kind of the nitty-gritty of how to get you guys better. What do you think Meyer has had the greatest touch in so far?
I think the biggest touch is just like attitude, confidence, stuff like that. He has a way of going about practices and going about bullpens and in game that just makes you feel like your stuff is the best it's ever felt and nothing can touch you that day. And I think that's part of like the experience that he comes in with is I kind of did my own research on him coming in, and he was part of a team that threw two perfect games last year in Greensboro. They had a park that's very tough to keep the ball in. And so it's like this guy knows what he's doing, and this guy knows what my stuff does. So why can't I trust my stuff? Why can't I trust him? So it's kind of like he adds a little bit of that confidence in what we're doing.
Now that we covered, like I said, probably a question you didn't necessarily expect to get asked. And to be fair, I didn't even think of it until we started talking about your experience so far at Indiana this year. But let's walk things back a bit. I know offline you mentioned your brother's history in the sport, and on here you mentioned growing up in a sports oriented family. You did say you were the youngest. So what was it like kind of following in the footsteps of your brother? And I'm assuming this means your parents were super athletic as well, including your sisters.
Yeah. Yeah. So my parents played sports in high school. My dad pitched a little bit of college ball, but he then went on to go to umpire school, and he was around the game for 30 plus years. And that kind of brought us around the game, which was the game we loved. And my brother, he kind of set the table. I was always around him and what he did. So he was someone I looked up to heavily, and him playing at the next level, playing professional ball, kind of gave me something to shoot for. They say like the older brother's the example, and the younger brother sets to be better than him.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I've grown up, is pushing myself with that challenge in mind. And then we all basically spent that time around the sport. My sisters both played softball. My brother played baseball. My mom and dad both played baseball and softball. So this is a sport that my family loves and has always been a part nightly, weekly. We've just always kind of had it in our lives. And I think that's important because that's where you learn the lessons. That's where you learn the game. That's where you really become a lover of baseball and the sport itself.
So growing up around the game through the lens of an umpire, does that mean you learned to never speak to an umpire, or you just learned the right way to speak to an umpire?
Yeah, that's definitely how to speak to an umpire. And what not to do with an umpire, because it would be fun going through the stories of people my dad has come across and experiences he's had, and sometimes he shares those stories, and some of them can get pretty grotesque and how he's been spoken to and how he's answered back. So yeah, I try to keep my composure the best I can, especially with the umpires. With the new data and everything around, we can track where every pitch is. It's hard not to hold them like too but it's still just a game. It's still they're doing their best. So yeah.
This might be the most pro umpire interview that we ever have on here until we actually get an umpire. You're probably going to hold them in the highest regard and speak the most kindly of any umpire. Now, I don't know if you would know this because your dad probably kept it close to his chest, but I'm curious to know if your life was ever threatened to your dad based on a call he made, whether it's from an athlete on the field or someone in the stands.
Mm, Possibly. I don't think it was a serious threat. But he's definitely had quite the words yelled at him.
I'm sure.
Um, I hold a video. He used to umpire for a team, which is now the AAA team for the Minnesota Twins, which is the St. Paul Saints. And he did that for 25 years when they were an indie ball team. And so that's where we grew up around. And they used to do some pretty wild stuff. So he said the weirdest game he's ever umpired was where he wasn't the umpire, he was a judge, and the fans got to make the call. And he just made the call that the fans decide. So the fans were the jury, and that's how they played the entire game.
That's pretty
Um,
fun, actually.
they were, I would say, the St. Paul Saints when they were an indie ball team in the American Association and the leagues before that. They were probably an early Savannah Bananas-esque feel to them.
They had incredible crowds always, and
Hmm.
that's kind of why it made so much sense for them to get picked up. And of course, the locale to the Minnesota Twins, but I know they've always done a great job with promotions and attendance. I mean, to think that people have actually heard of a team that's playing independently
Yeah.
is probably a pretty good sign.
Yeah.
But with this, so that's probably enough about the others. That gives us a decent indication of who you are and probably why you're a pretty well-mannered individual growing up in the house of an umpire. So you know when to speak up and probably only to say something if you 100% know you're right, or even beyond that, only if something could possibly be changed. You're
Yeah.
probably pretty used to just going with the flow accordingly.
Not only was my dad an umpire, he was also my middle school principal. So
Uh-uh.
it was it was a double decker. I was held in high regard on the baseball field and in school.
So you probably just never opened your mouth as a child. That was probably the easiest way to get through life.
No, I was able to open my mouth just to say something worthwhile and not be too smart aleck.
Well, with that, let's get into a little bit more of your own baseball journey. So I assume to go to Mizzou out of high school, you probably had to have a pretty good career or at least throw hard at the right times to get seen and signed by an SEC school. So if we can go back to kind of what I assume are significant high school successes, what was it like for you growing up playing ball in Minnesota and then ultimately deciding on Mizzou?
Yeah. I had a really interesting recruiting path to get to Mizzou. I was someone that I played high school ball. I played a little bit of club ball. I played with the Minnesota Blizzard, great club out of Minnesota. I still go back there, but I'd only play like maybe a spring or maybe a fall because I was playing two other sports at the time, football and hockey. So I'd play maybe one season of club ball, and that's kind of where you get seen a lot, which I kind of got seen then. I went to the PBR stuff, the perfect game stuff a little bit, one every year, and I got asked to join like one of the tournament teams and stuff like that. So that was kind of where I got my first exposure from Mizzou, and they invited me down for like a prospect camp, but I wasn't really the hardest throwing guy on the team. I was always a good pitcher, always I would say the ace of my squads, but I wasn't the hardest throwing guy. The sophomore year, I was throwing 85, 86, and they invited me down. Prospect camp, I get one inning to pitch. I throw 85, 86. The pitching coach at that time, Coach Corral, asked me last pitch. I had a guy 1-2. He's like, Tony, I want you from the back of the field. He asked, I want you to throw this ball as hard as you can. Threw it 87 right down the middle. They said, we'd love to see how you develop, stuff like that. So I went on through high school. I kind of got committed early in the fall of my junior year. And that was kind of like a relief because COVID hit later that year in the spring. So knowing that you were committed at that time, I still wasn't the hardest throwing guy. By my senior year, I only hit like 88. But I knew there was more in there, and they knew there was more in there. But as COVID hit, I kind of went from being a scholarship guy to then like a preferred walk-on spot. And
Hmm.
they're like, we want you to come still, but we just don't have the money for you because we have guys coming back from COVID. So I was like, okay. I figured the best way for me to tell if I will play at the next level is to go against the best competition. Like if I can't make it at Mizzou, then I'll have to see something else or I'll have to develop. So I decided to go there as a preferred walk-on. And my goal in the fall, which I would highly suggest to any high school players listening, is my goal was to throw in midweeks, maybe be a midweek starter. And that eventually led to being focused on what I could do, throwing strikes, making my pitches better in that development. And that kind of led to me having a really good fall and being one of the arms that they looked at to be in high leverage situation. And eventually later down the road, as conference play got started Saturdays for Mizzou in my freshman year. And that was kind of the big thing was staying focused on what I could do at that point, not being a guy that threw 95 or 93. Really only got up to 92 was the hardest I threw while I was sitting like 88, 89.
It is kind of an interesting topic to discuss that you feel setting very achievable goals in a sense is what enabled you to kind of develop and set your mind free. Really stay within yourself is probably the best way to phrase it. And of course, everyone wants to set goals that are achievable, but then we go back to our business 101s or learning about smart objectives and things like that. I, I'm going to put myself on the spot here to see if I can remember the SMART. Measurable is the M, A is achievable, R is, I think, no, it wouldn't be realistic. T is time, so like within a time frame, whatever. I got the fact that I went 3 for 5, I'm okay with. I'll probably look at this later and see how I do. I need to cement that in my brain at some point. But rather than most kids who go to college and they want to be the man or they want to either be the closer the second they step foot on campus, or they want to be the Friday or Saturday guy the second they step foot on campus. Well, let's face it, especially with you showing up to school when you did, so the fall of 2020 going into the 2021 season, you're also competing against a bunch of fifth years who have been in college for an extremely long time. Those guys know college baseball like the back of their hand, and you're still a child. You're still developing. You're going to have a much better time gunning for that midweek spot, which to others might be a little less desirable, but it's a great way for you to get exposure, get comfortable in the college game. And something that I also think is unique about college baseball is oftentimes the guys that do best in the midweeks are the guys that throw 86 to 89 miles per hour and throw strike after strike after strike instead of your dude that might throw 93 to 94 but also might walk every other batter he faces. And it sounds like that gave you a lane to just get accustomed to college baseball and then ultimately, like you said, make the move to what you eventually wanted to do anyways, which is be the dude on the weekends.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that getting comfortable playing at that higher level, playing at that higher speed, because it really is the big difference is the speed of the game and the different things that you have to remember. That's the difference between high school ball and college ball. That really helps you then get to where you want to be later down the road.
By
Um,
the way, S is specific. I just remembered. I still don't
there it
remember
is.
the R, but I mean, that's perfect. Even your goal was so specific because you wanted to throw on midweeks. In baseball terms, that is such a specific goal, especially in the college world, to be a midweek starter. I bet you could ask however many high school seniors you want, and I don't know if any of them would say their goal is to be the midweek starter when they show up as a freshman. Just having that edge, even knowing what you wanted, probably puts you in a better place. But I really do think that's a testament to the work you put in, knowing yourself, and as you said, kind of committing to the development and what you had in front of you. So now let's shift into that role that you played as a weekend starter as a freshman. And I'm assuming, I don't know how you guys did that year. I know Mizzou baseball kind of hit a little bit of a lull at one point, and I don't remember the exact timeline of that. But I assume you had to at least be riding a high a little bit, knowing the success and the exposure that you got.
Yeah. That freshman year was quite an experience. The first taste of college ball and being put in some of the situations. I remember the first SEC pitch of that year that I saw was Friday night versus Vandy, and it was put 420 feet. Our pitcher threw 96 sinkers, and Enrique Bradfield put him 420 feet to start the year. And it was like, wow, we are in this. Which makes it like even more surreal that like I look back to that freshman year and the experience that I faced. I faced some pretty good squads um in that realm and had my go against Tennessee, had my go against LSU at that time, which was, Dylan Cruz, Drew Gilbert, a lot of the names that are now starting to pop up. And it's really crazy to see at this point where they've gone and like I did that as a freshman, so like that gives you confidence later down the road and everything like that. And it was a decent year. There's definitely stuff to work on, and there's always things to work on. I think that's a big thing is like where do you go from having a good freshman year to the next year, and how do you get better from there?
So what did that look like for you? How did you approach your sophomore year?
Yeah, my freshman year, I kind of got fat. I put on 40 pounds. So the sophomore summer, I went and played a little bit of ball in the Appy League, spent about a month out there, and then came back to campus and worked on, all right, what does a better looking Tony? How do I gain a little bit of length? How do I gain a little bit of muscle from that weight that I put on? Because mass equals gas, and that's what I thought. And then we went into sophomore year of, all right, what now needs to happen? Our pitching coach from freshman year left to work with the Orioles, chase a dream that he had. We brought in a new pitching coach, which had some new thoughts, new ideas to bring to the table, and that led into working on kind of like a new delivery, new slot going into sophomore season, just to create a little bit different look to the hitters and see what that did with the fastball, with the slider, see what kind of movement we could get with the changeup and everything like that, and how that amplified my pitches. And he had quite the experience with like working on that and the next level. So then going into the sophomore season, it felt good. I would start out the sophomore season strong with 18 innings in span of 3 weeks, and that eventually got to conference play. Had a cold little weekend at home against Tennessee, and I ended up tearing my UCL in that weekend and ended up needing surgery to miss my sophomore season. So that was unfortunate, but I felt going into that sophomore season, I felt strong. It was like confidence was high for sure. Kind of knowing that as a freshman, what you did, then going to your sophomore year, knowing that you're kind of the man now. Like some of the other guys, they were older guys, they left. There's going to be a little bit more weight put on your shoulders, and I felt pretty comfortable with that weight on there, and it was just a bit of a bummer to then have that cut short.
What role were you throwing in your sophomore year, and roughly how hard were you throwing at that time?
My role my sophomore year was a little bit of like a span role. I had two starts, I believe, maybe one, but I was like the long relief kind of guy that would come out when, we might be in a tough situation and then go an extra 3, 4 innings. And that was kind of my role. And that was kind of what my identity was I really liked coming out of the pen because there's that jolt of excitement. And I felt like I was pretty effective out of the pen. Of course, the starter program's a little bit nicer on the schedule and everything like that. But I was throwing about 91, 90, 91, but I had different kind of pitch shapes and everything like that. And it was really playing well at that point. So that was kind of like the big thing was not only the velo, but how those pitches played together.
Did the slot drop, or what were you guys trying to do? What was the big change?
Yeah, so we changed my arm slot a little bit lower to try to get a little bit more of a deceptive slot and then also create a little bit more horizontal movement with the pitches. And I was able to throw a pretty good slider off that. The fastball was playing well off that, and my changeup like was upgraded immensely.
And then now shifting gears a little bit and discussing the injury that you endured your sophomore year. From what you could tell or what you could remember, were there any warning signs at all? Were you feeling fatigue or discomfort? I know you said it was a super cold weekend, so it wasn't probably the best environment for you to go out and try to get hot in an instant and get a bunch of guys out, especially to do that against Tennessee. That's a little bit of a rivalry for you guys. I know
Yeah.
that. That's a big deal. But was there anything that had you or the staff thinking like, we might need to like walk this back a little bit, or was it really just like in the moment the elbow went?
Looking back, there might have been a couple of signs that probably should have been listened to at the moment, but being a young guy, you feel like you can heal from it or
Yeah,
like
you're tougher than
go
anything.
through anything. So there's like a little bit of like forearm stiffness in there. And I believe that like I might have thrown quite a bit during that week trying to get ready for this conference play. So that was probably just a little bit inexperience, but I also think that it might have came from like you never really know what they come from,
Right.
but I never really threw all year round before and kind of going into that year I was kind of throwing quite a bit. So I think just maybe having that full year of throwing, full year of baseball. When I was younger, I always took time off to play football or hockey, which kind of let the body reset itself in ways. But just kind of having that, maybe there are signs, but there's nothing that I can really remember from.
Yeah, yeah. And I know asking you to think back to then, that's probably not a time that there was significant data tracking that you guys were doing either. But even the things that you were able to mention, I do think are worth kind of highlighting real quick
Mhm.
again, being the fact that you started throwing year round for the first time. You put on a bunch of weight, so your body changed a little bit. Not that the weight is inherently bad. It sounds like the weight might have been bad, but you were able to transform it into something decent. But still, you put on a bunch of weight, so your body changed. You were also throwing harder on average than you ever had before. And you're put in a new situation. You're throwing out of the bullpen as opposed to being a starter with a really distinct schedule. And then it also sounds like during the week, your acute workload spiked a little bit. You made more throws, possibly at a higher effort in that week, prepping for a really big weekend, which ultimately got played in somewhat inclement weather. So a
Yeah.
lot of things went into the mix to ultimately what culminated in an injury. So now let's discuss that situation a little bit. I know offline you said you ended up getting surgery from Dr. Paletto with the Cardinals organization, him being their team doctor. You got UCL repair. So if you want to talk through what that rehab looked like and maybe where your head was at as well.
Yeah. So Paletta, he was close to us, just a 2 hour drive away from St. Louis. We felt like that was the best option. It was, and he suggested a repair. Of course, that's if he went in and saw that I was a good candidate, and he did. So I got the repair. That entails 2 weeks in a soft brace, and then that's all about working your flexion and extension back out, which might be some of the toughest parts of the Tommy John recovery.
The range
Um,
of motion beat you up.
yeah, yeah, because some days that elbow did not want to move, and those were some days that there might have been a little bit more pain than usual because you have to kind of force your elbow to move a little bit more than it wants to. And then slowly we'd progress from flexion to extension to just kind of getting the shoulder back into it and doing all the shoulder stuff. At the time, I had a really great trainer by the name of Kaylee Swain. She's now with Texas A&M. I had to shout her out because we spent quite a bit of time working on this first recovery. And it was all about getting the shoulder ready, getting everything else in your body ready, so that when the elbow was then ready to go, you were able to get back to throwing. And of course, that entails the forearm, the bicep, the tricep, everything like that. And it's honestly like looking back now, I wish I had something like the Flex Pro Grip to use because using it now, it feels like my forearm feels like it's gotten so much stronger throughout all of it. But doing that rehab and building that back up, it kind of gives you a little bit of like a focus on stuff that you might not have ever been focused on before of like shoulder strength and balance and everything like that, which kind of the stuff that gets pushed away when you're in the middle of a season and everything like that.
Were there certain aspects of the rehab that you kind of felt like, I don't necessarily want to say were a blessing in disguise, but for example, you mentioned being able to spend more time on the things that you don't normally spend time on, whether it's specific shoulder strength, whether it's balance. Did you feel like you were kind of able to identify other flaws you might have had and really treat this rehabilitation as a development cycle for yourself?
Absolutely. It was like we were starting all over again, learning how to throw. Almost all of my throwing progression was videotaped. So the light throws that we started with up to the bullpens, like I was able to see how my body moved. And not only that, but as I was still in that brace in the cast, I was able to work on core, hips, everything that kind of is secondary to the arm when you think about throwing. But it's kind of like a blessing because it forces you to take time away from what you normally think would need to be strong to then strengthen everything else.
So where
Um,
did you feel body wise coming out of the surgery? Before we get into maybe hiccups that happened a little bit down the road, did you feel for the most part like you were in a good spot coming out of this rehab?
yeah, so that was something that I also watched closely was nutrition, everything like that. You're not doing as much activity when you're in the rehab cycle, when you're not throwing, when you're not practicing every day. So I worked closely with our nutritionist to work on body composition, stuff like that. And our strength coach was great at that time too, of just I got to do leg day almost every other day. And it was just something to build all the stuff up so that when I was ready to play again, I'd be stronger than I ever was before. So yeah, I felt pretty good, pretty strong. I was pushing PRs on legs and everything like that. So all of it kind of was a blessing in disguise to kind of focus on that stuff as well.
And through most of this initial rehab, were there any real hiccups or was it a pretty solid forward progression?
It was a pretty solid forward progression. That was something that I was warned about early on is like there might be setbacks and stuff like that. And that's normal. Like sometimes your arm doesn't feel great and we need to take a step back or stay right where we are instead of progressing. For this rehab, there wasn't really any step backs or anything like that where I was like, I don't know if I can do this today. I don't know if like I'm not feeling it today or my arm needs a rest. We built in some rest weeks and everything like that, but for this first one, it really wasn't anything that we had to deal with too much. It's not that it was an easy recovery, but it definitely wasn't as hard as some others.
I think to the listeners, you guys at this point would probably be used to me asking about the mental side or what Tony might have been dealing with. And part of the reason I haven't done that yet is the ultimate setback that he faced, which was just a few weeks before the season started. So he mentioned having this UCL repair. And then unfortunately, although the rehab for the most part was pretty smooth, in a bullpen or live, was it that you kind of felt some pain in the elbow again?
Yeah, it was alive. I felt a very similar popped to the first one.
And again, like it seemed like everything was progressing well. You guys were tracking stuff, had a good idea of where you were at. I assume had radar gun on a lot of the stuff you were doing. And then lo and behold, just before the season starts, you feel the pop.
Yeah, yeah, that was a tough day for sure. I felt it. I didn't believe it. So it was alive. I was 90, 91, and my fastball was really playing well at that on that day. Um, about 15 pitches in, it felt something. I didn't believe it. I threw another two pitches. I was like, yeah, that's the same feeling. And then I ran off and just kind of the emotions kind of poured and I went to worst case scenario. I was like telling my trainer that came over, I was like, it happened again. Like something's wrong. And they're like, it might just be something, some cartilage moving or something like that. Some from the surgery. We'll go get it checked out. I was able to get it checked out. Wasn't really sure from the first couple examinations. Tried to build back up into throwing again and then wasn't really feeling it at high intent. So we went back and got some more imaging done in a better position to kind of see the stress of the UCL and figured out that the UCL really wasn't doing its job per se of keeping the bones together. And so that kind of led to the pain and eventually led to another full Tommy John surgery.
Right. So basically what was happening, and I'll just add my little take on the situation from what we've discussed, maybe just for context. The ligament was still attached. If you just looked at your elbow, everything was normal. However, under load, the UCL had significant laxity or significant stretching. So, as you said, it wasn't doing its job keeping the bones together. And then, if the muscle tendon units aren't stiff enough, they're also not going to support the UCL in this process either. So, you had an elbow that was experiencing significantly more joint gapping than it should. And whether it was the pain associated with a ligament or the stretching or the bones colliding, no matter what, you weren't in a good position and your soft tissue was never going to be able to do its job with you throwing a baseball 90 plus miles per hour.
Yeah, correct. That was tough to find out because I just went through this entire process and was just getting ready to start a new year where I felt like a good year would put me in where I wanted to be going forward. Finding out that I had another 12 months of rehab coming up was definitely a tough thing to hear.
This is the time where I'll begin to ask about some of the mental stuff. It sounds like in the first one, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you were in good spirits for the most of it. As long as you regained that elbow range of motion, or once
Mhm.
you did, it sounds like it was kind of smooth sailing for the most part. Not, I don't want to make rehab sound like a breeze, but it sounds like you had a really good group around you, a lot of support, and it made it maybe just ever so easier to work through the process just with the team you had around you and a lot of people kind of in your corner. And then the second time, not that you didn't have people in your corner, but I'm sure the doubt kind of creeps in or the identity crisis of like, well, yeah, people make it back from one, but now it just happened again. I put in all that work, and how do I know it's not going to happen again after this? Like, what do I do? Where do I go? I know the spiral happened to me with my own shoulder injury, but I'd love if you could kind of, if you're comfortable, open up about that a little bit.
Yeah, funny thing about that is it really wasn't something where I was like spiraling too much because it was the only option for me. Baseball was the game I loved, and I knew that I was gonna need this surgery again, and I was gonna do it again, and that's the only option. Of course, those first emotions of holy cow, I have to do this. What happens now? What do I do? Hit. But then as you get the surgery, it starts to become real. You're like, all right, the only thing I can do now is do it all again. The only thing I can do now is keep moving forward. And I frustrate some people in my life because I'm overly positive, and that's just who I am. So I really bring a positive light to my situation and the situations I'm in. That negativity didn't hit much. Of course, there were some spots that were like, man, what if I don't get full extension back? What if I don't get full flexion back? What if I come back throwing 84? That doesn't play here or anything like that. But it's really just about moving forward in the process. And that's something that I did. Of course, watching baseball for 2 years and when you want to be out there is a tough thing to do, but it was really a way for me to figure out how I can be the most away from baseball as well. How I can like go forth and really focus on who I am as a person and gave me a little bit of time to do that. And then how can I make others around me better? That was really something that I focused on was how can I be beneficial to this team even though I can't throw a baseball. So that was kind of something that I focused on throughout the process. I had a couple of different books, couple different stuff that I read that was like focused on the mindset. One of the great ones was Chop Wood, Carry Water, which is just all about doing meticulous tasks, as in like rehab every day and how important it is to do those to the best of your ability. So that's kind of how I went through that rehab process the second time.
This might be a funky question, but other than just being a quote unquote good teammate, what did you do to help others get better?
Um, there was a couple things that I probably did that I shouldn't have done. After my second rehab, I caught a live with my brace still on.
Okay.
Uh, so that was probably not what I should have done. I love catching. I always say I'm born to be a catcher, forced to be a left-hand pitcher, but I always tried to be there, whether that's picking guys up or feeding a machine or anything like that. I was basically trying to do trying to be a player, but at the same time I also felt like I had a little bit of like a manager role. So that was like, what can I do to set this thing up for guys to be best prepared? And that's kind of what I did, is the small stuff that takes time out of everyone else's day that I could do with one arm, one hand. So
I just wanted to ask because people always talk about like helping out the teammates and being there. And yeah, you can pick up trash in the dugout, but I wanted to know if there's anything more. So I appreciate you sharing that. But did you feel in the second rehab you did anything differently? Did you and the team you had with you look at the process and be like, for whatever reason, this first time around it failed. So we are going to do X or we are going to do Y or Z. Just kind of look at the whole script that you guys had from the first time around and make any changes.
yeah, they say that it becomes easier the more you do it. So having that experience of going through one rehab process kind of makes it a little easier to not only like change stuff, but to know what your body does, like the little soreness, the little bit here or there, to know that that's normal. Because you'll feel the same type of like, oh, my elbow really doesn't want to move today. What can I do now? The first time you're like, oh boy, my elbow's stuck. Second time, second rehab, you're like, all right, I know what happens here. I just gotta move it a little bit, get it a little loose. But I wouldn't say we changed too much. I don't think that necessarily what happened after the first one was necessarily because of rehab or anything that we did. There's a little bit of difference in plans just provided to us. The second one, throwing wise, was a little bit different on how we approached that. But I wouldn't say there's outright too much changes. It was all about gaining back your strength, gaining back your mobility, and just going through the entire process like that.
Were there any setbacks this time around, or was it also relatively straightforward?
I would say there wasn't huge setbacks, but there's definitely more times where we were like, all right, we have to kind of stay at this level or maybe back down a level throwing wise or exercise wise to kind of make sure that like I'm able to rest up, recover, get back through it, but then progress later from that. So that's kind of the biggest setbacks. There was a little bit more of a problem catch play wise. This time I kind of forgot how to throw a ball within 60 feet. After 60 feet, I was good to go, but those first couple throws, you think about it too much. Your hand kind of doesn't feel real, and it's about learning how to get through that. And that was a little challenge that we came across, and the solution was to just kind of make the throw harder. So I played quick catch for the first 15 throws that I did, and then when I got loose with that, it felt perfectly normal. So
Just had to take the thinking out of it, huh?
yeah, you really do. That's sometimes throughout this entire process when you're thinking about mechanics and how your arm works and stuff like that, you just got to stop thinking and throw.
Did you make any mechanical adjustments during either of the rehabs?
There was slight adjustments. I kind of found a happy medium of where my slot had been arm-wise that gave me the best product on fastball and stuff like that, and I was able to spin out of there. The big thing was like kind of hips. How your hips move are so important to pitching and your health and stuff like that is making those adjustments in your hips and legs and how your front leg is used. Because I had a pretty weak front leg block my freshman year, sophomore year, to then kind of work on that as you go through that bullpen session. So those were slight adjustments, but I wouldn't say there's too many large things that we changed.
And as games begun now in this 2025 season, where was your head at? And I guess how far off were you from making that debut? Because you
Um,
picked up what, like midway through, maybe towards the end of the 2025 season, correct?
yeah,
You
I picked
ultimately
up in
made it back.
April, which was about 12 months after surgery. And I was not back to the pitcher that I had shown to be, but I was the pitcher that could I could compete. So that's what I did. I went out there and competed without my best stuff necessarily. And that led to some poor results that even that might be the harder part coming back from a rehab is getting back to a spot where you're in control of yourself. You have confidence in what you're doing. And it wasn't the easiest time coming back because there was some games that had no idea where my fastball was going. And so I was kind of getting hit around or walks or stuff like that. And that led to a score sheet that wasn't the best, but you can't really let that get in your mind going forward.
I'm sure that was a little bit of a funky situation for you where in your preparation, you know you're not yet the same pitcher you once were, but you're also extremely tired of standing on a rail watching baseball for game after game, year after year, that you said, screw it, I'm good enough, I'm strong enough, I know I can get out there and go. So, what was like that, I don't know, pros and cons list or that decision that you had to make, knowing that you weren't your best self, but you just needed to scratch that competitive itch? Like how'd you work through that?
Yeah. And there was the talk with my coaches and stuff like that, my trainer of, well, I don't know if we should rush back, which rush is a interesting word to use there. I don't know if we should come back yet because you might not have your best stuff. You might not have what you had before. And I was in the spot where it was like, well, do I sit out, throw like live ABs against our guys? I was still doing high pressure stuff, still facing hitters, stuff like that, and do it in practice, or do I try to be out there for my team, try to be out there selfishly for me a little bit and compete in game? And ultimately came to the decision like the worst thing that might happen was poor stat sheet because the difference was live ABs versus in-game stuff. And the only thing difference between that is the in-game stuff gets recorded. So that's kind of where I was at. And I was like, I really don't care about the stats. So I want to go out there and compete for my team. And I want to be out there. If not, like, I feel like me coming back kind of gave the team a little bit of excitement because they all saw me go through the rehab and stuff. They always been with me throughout the entire process. So that gave them a little bit of excitement of, all right, Tony's back. This should be fun. So yeah, that's kind of where I was at with the decision between that, whether that's right or wrong decision. I think it played out as it should, and that experience kind of it might have dropped confidence a little bit, but that's always something that can be built back up. And we saw improvement throughout the weeks was the biggest part, is it was improvement week after week with the more time I spent out there.
And I'm assuming improvement was not only results, but maybe it was little things like walks
Mhm.
started to decrease over time, opponent barrels maybe decreased over time, and you probably started to throw a little bit harder in the process as well.
Yeah, stuff like that where you start to get a little bit more comfortable. Of course, there was still poor poor outings, stuff like that, because that's baseball, but you got to focus on the stuff that you can control. And that was stuff that we looked at and it improved and it got to a point where it felt really good to be back out there again.
Were you back up to that 90, 91 mark when you made the return, or did you go back out on the field with lower velo?
No, I believe the first time I was out, I was probably 86, 88. And then every week it would kind of jump up a little bit. So that was kind of like I knew that it wasn't the velo that I was throwing, but I knew that with that I could compete. Of course, with velo also comes the command part, which you kind of have to get on the mound and um, get used to competing in that way as well.
And the year comes to an end. I know it might not have been the best on the stat sheet for you or the team as a whole, but you made it through a month of playing healthy.
Mhm.
How were you feeling physically, mentally, but personally? I know results. Of course, you want to win. You want to move on. And I know it wasn't necessarily the best year for Mizzou baseball, but how were you feeling finally throwing a month of baseball wearing a uniform again?
Yeah, being back, it definitely was something where I was happy to be back. Of course, with how the games were and some of the performances that I had. It was a little bit of an up and down, but I was happy to be out there. Like I missed, the funny part is the stuff that you miss is the post game feeling sore. Post game, you're tired. Like you miss the part where you're like, I competed, I gave all I could. And that's kind of the stuff that I missed. And it felt good to have that back and then to move forward and know that there's a next step out there and know that there's a progression to keep going forward and to see the progress as you're building up. So mentally, I was excited to see what could keep going from this and where I gone, but it was a tough decision ultimately to then leave Mizzou at that point, but it wasn't anything against anyone there. I loved my 4 years there, but it was something where I needed a fresh new start, and that's kind of what ultimately led to the change I made coming to IU.
And ultimately making the decision to go to IU, what was it that set IU apart? Because let's face it, there's a lot of schools that have labs, there's a lot of schools that quote unquote do development. But what did you think was so special about Bloomington?
The most special thing was their investment into me and the relationships that they were able to provide early on. I mean, I felt like Coach Glant, Coach Sagerman, Coach Mercer, they felt invested into my development from where I was at in summer ball because that's where my portal action happened was I was out playing summer ball, getting comfortable back on that mound even more.
What league were
Um,
you in?
Appy League again. I was
Nice.
out in Burlington. Shout out Sock Puppets. So I was out there and they would they would make those connections. They would be hitting my lineup every couple of days. They went through the process of showing me what's going to happen this fall to then develop me as a pitcher and what they were looking at, what they liked, and the confidence they had in me of what they saw, not only from that past year of who I was at that person, but who I am as like my actual person is what really made the difference. And I could tell that they were genuine and cared about my development as much as I did.
Well, now let's flash forward to you finally feeling good. Knock on wood. My desk here is wood, so don't worry, I got you. But finally, I assume finally feeling like yourself again, getting to take the ball and wear crimson and cream, I believe, if I get
Mhm.
my colors correct. I need to make sure I do that because I did say red and white on a previous podcast, and I know that's just not proper branding.
Yeah.
So never daunted, crimson and cream. Again, I know all my questions are how's it feel, but this time you're probably after having a good summer, signing with IU, going through a fall of development and probably having the confidence from a staff that really believes in you and knows what you can become, you probably started to have a little bit more self-belief. And then you're handed the ball to go on Fridays. And so far, going on Fridays has required you to pitch against LSU and UNC. So I assume you're probably in a pretty good spot, even if the results, I know you guys would like to win a few more games to start the year, but you guys have certainly been challenged. So, yeah, I'm kind of stumbling through the end of this question, but I'd love for you to share now a little bit how it feels to just finally be Tony Neubeck on the mound again.
Yeah. That's the part of baseball that I love is the challenge. Giving the ball for the first game is a feeling that not a ton of people get in their careers. And I was blessed to be able to get that this year at IU. And that confidence that your coaches have on you to set the tone for ultimately every pitcher to look at you and say, we're going off this guy is huge. That confidence they have in me, I see it every day, and that builds my confidence even more. But they understood that I liked the challenge. They understood that I was able to kind of, I feel like my composure, like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, has kind of been, stay pretty composed on the mound, no matter if it's umps or crowds or anything like that. But that's really what they looked at is this is who Tony Neubeck is. And that's kind of stuff that I pride myself is the small things of baseball and then just executing pitches. That's the biggest thing they ask of us here is execution, commitment to that pitch, and just kind of throwing it with a little spice on it. Like make them prove that they're gonna be a top 10 team this year. So that's kind of where I stood going into it, and having that confidence to go out there and be like, this is what I have, especially with some stuff that I've never thrown against a team before. I added a cutter in the offseason and not knowing how that would perform, but throwing it in situations where you have to get the out is something that it's exciting, and it worked well. It has been a big pitch for me this year already. So that's kind of like an exciting part of starting the year and seeing how all the stuff you worked on in the fall comes together.
What is the arsenal now at this point, and did you guys make any mechanical tweaks along with it?
Yeah, I came in with fastball, slider, curve, and a changeup that didn't really do a whole lot. And that was one of the things that they talked about when recruiting me out the portal is we want to add a cutter, and we think a cutter would add greatly to your portfolio. So we added a cutter. I didn't really tweak anything mechanically. Coach Glant gave me a grip that he's seen work before with some of the guys that he worked with in the Yankees. He's like, find a way to make this feel comfortable. And I kind of focused on that in the fall, along with my other pitches. So I throw a four seam fastball, a little bit of cut on it. I'm a natural supinator, I believe it is. I throw everything with a little bit of cut to it. So fastball, cutter. I throw a little bit of like a gyro slider that kind of mixes in with a curveball. And then I have a more loopy 12-6 curveball. We continue to work on new pitches as the weeks go on, so there might be something else coming along here.
Uh-oh, but we're not going to spoil it.
No, I don't want to talk too much about it right now.
All right, but just know that something is in the works, is what you're saying.
Might have something that finds its way to the other side of the
That's
better.
what I was going to say. Maybe something a little arm side.
Yeah, so
Uh-oh. All right. Well, we'll have to keep our eyes on the True Media or the TrackMan plots or whatever is available in the college setting.
yeah,
Hopefully, the IU analytics team can post something on Twitter or give us a break whenever this pitch debuts. But
yeah,
Tony, I really appreciate you going through the story and kind of bringing us to the current moment. And I guess let's go from the current moment. And before I do let you go, talk a little bit about the future, what's on the horizon. I'm not going to make you look too far ahead from this exact moment, but you guys have obviously been battle tested early on. What's the outlook for Big Ten play and kind of where's the team at? I assume you guys, of course, want to win some more games. You would have loved to have a better record going into Big Ten play coming up here in a couple of weeks, but you guys have been tested by some of the best teams in the country, and you've shown that you guys can play with the best teams in the country. And let's face it, you've only been outside legitimately for like 12 days at this point. So
mhm,
there's still a lot to be worked out. And I know you guys are an extremely talented ball club. So I assume the sights are still set on a Big Ten championship and maybe making a run in the postseason. But what can you share from inside the locker room?
absolutely. I mean, we recognize that there's the talent in the locker room. We recognize that the games went the way they did, but they could have had much different outcomes on our behalf. We realize that there's some controllable things that we can do to then give ourselves a best chance of winning those ones. And we have our eyes set on the next game, but of course, we have the mentality of we're going to go into each game and win every single one. So that's kind of where we're at this point, and we are able to look at what we've done in the past couple of weeks and move forward from it with the lessons learned and kind of digest that to then go into the next weeks ready to go, understanding what needs to be done on my part, just getting in that zone more, just getting like attacking is how we always love to be on the mound. So that's kind of where we're looking, and we have some Big Ten games that are going to be challenges, but we'll go into each game expecting to come out with a W.
Awesome. Well, Tony, I think that does it for me at this point. We've certainly been thorough and we've covered a lot. Well, I say that does it for me. There's one last piece that we didn't cover, and that is that you are a hockey state champion. I know I told you we were going to discuss that quickly, I was really hoping when you told me you were a hockey state champion that we were going to find out you were also on the Minnesota All Hair team. I'm a little disappointed that you were not, and I don't know. We might need to recreate this and find a way for you to get on like some Big Ten All Hair team or do something unique going forward.
Yeah, that hockey was definitely a big part of growing up and winning that state championship. Kind of the most intimidating part of my life at that point, being in front of a big crowd like that for probably the biggest part of your high school experience. I did win one in baseball, but that's not even close to how
We didn't
big.
even talk about you winning a high school baseball state championship.
Yeah, yeah, that happened my senior year. I
So
forgot
you
that that.
literally went out on top.
Yeah, yeah. That was pretty cool to play at Target Field. But playing at the X or now Grand Casino Arena for the where the Wild play, that thing gets packed and it's a high pressure situation. And I think that's where I kind of get comfortable in the moment. Helped me in my college career for sure.
That was the formative moment of when
Yeah,
Tony Neubeck became a man.
yeah. It was quite the experience. I spent a little bit too much time in the penalty box, but it was definitely a fun experience for sure.
Do you think baseball would benefit from having a penalty box?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know how much it might. It might. Like you take away a fielder for an inning. Like if he gets a little too chippy, you get thrown in the penalty box, you take away the fielder for that inning, that could be a big inning.
That'd be a really interesting move, or a batter or something like that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe we'll have to play around with it. See if your dad can get that implemented. If he still has some pull in some various leagues.
Yeah, I don't know. That would be some interesting stuff if they added a penalty box.
Hey, we're on to something here. But Tony, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you sharing the story. Definitely covered a ton, and I know what you offered today has to have helped someone listening in, and I'm just honored to be able to work with you now and work with the Hoosiers program, and I'm super glad that baseball brought us together. So thanks a ton, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I can't thank Flex Pro Grip enough for the way they've helped me with this season. So yeah, thank you
Well,
very much.
of course, man. And to all the listeners out there, thanks for laying back with us.